Chapter 12, Part 3 of How I Found Livingstone. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Beth Ann. How I Found Livingstone: Travels, Adventures, and Discoveries in Central Africa, including 4 months' residence with Dr. Livingstone. By Sir Henry M. Stanley. Chapter 12, Part 3 Intercourse with Livingstone at Ujiji. Livingstone's own story of his journeys, his troubles, and disappointments. From the beginning of 1867, the time of his arrival at Cazembe's, to the middle of March, 1869, the time of his arrival at Ujiji, he was mostly engaged in correcting the errors and misrepresentations of the Portuguese travellers. The Portuguese, in speaking of the river Chambezi, invariably spoke of it as "our own Zambezi," that is, the Zambezi which flows through the Portuguese possessions of the Mozambique. In going from Cazembe from Nyassa, they said, "you will cross our own Zambezi." Such positive and reiterated information, given not only orally, but in their books and maps, was naturally confusing. When the Doctor perceived that what he saw and what they described were at variance, out of a sincere wish to be correct, and lest he might have been mistaken himself, he started to retravel the ground he had travelled before. Over and over again he traversed the several countries watered by the several rivers of the complicated water system, like an uneasy spirit. Over and over again he asked the same questions from the different peoples he met, until he was obliged to desist, lest they might say, "The man is mad, he has got water on the brain." But his travels and tedious labours in Lunda and the adjacent countries have established beyond doubt, first, that the Chambezi is a totally distinct river from the Zambezi of the Portuguese, and secondly, that the Chambezi, starting from about latitude 11 degrees south, is no other than the most southerly feeder of the great Nile, thus giving that famous river a length of over 2,000 miles of direct latitude, making it second to the Mississippi, the longest river in the world. The real and true name of the Zambezi is the Dombazi. When Lacerda and his Portuguese successors, coming to Cazembe, crossed the Chambezi, and heard its name, they very naturally set it down as "our own Zambezi," and, without further inquiry, sketched it as running in that direction. During his researches in that region, so pregnant in discoveries, Livingstone came to a lake lying northeast of Cazembe, which the natives call Limba, from the country of that name which bordered it on the east and south. In tracing the lake north, he found it to be none other than the Tanganyika, or the south eastern extremity of it, which looks, on the Doctor's map, very much like an outline of Italy. The latitude of the southern end of this great body of water is about 8 degrees 42' south, which thus gives it a length, from north to south, of 360 geographical miles. From the southern extremity of the Tanganyika he crossed Marungu, and came in sight of Lake Meru. Tracing this lake, which is about 60 miles in length, to its southern head, he found a river, called the Luapula, entering it from that direction. Following the Luapula south, he found it issue from the large lake of Bangweolo, which is nearly as large in superficial area as the Tanganyika. In exploring for the waters which discharge themselves into the lake, he found that by far the most important of these feeders was the Chambezi, so that he had thus traced the Chambezi from its source to Lake Bangweolo, and the issue from its northern head, under the name of Luapula, and found it enter Lake Meru. Again he returned to Cazembe's, well satisfied that the river running north through 3 degrees of latitude could not be the river running south under the name of Zambezi, though there might be remarkable resemblance in their names. At Cazembe's he found an old, white bearded half caste, named Mohammed bin Sali, who was kept as a kind of prisoner at large by the king, because of certain suspicious circumstances attending his advent and stay in the country. Through Livingstone's influence, Mohammed bin Sali obtained his release. On the road to Ujiji he had bitter cause to regret having exerted himself in the half caste's behalf. He turned out to be a most ungrateful wretch, who poisoned the minds of the Doctor's few followers, and ingratiated himself with them by selling the favours of his concubines to them, by which he reduced them to a kind of bondage under him. The Doctor was deserted by all but two. Even faithful Susi and Chuma deserted him for the service of Mohammed bin Sali. But they soon repented, and returned to their allegiance. From the day he had the vile old man in his company, manifold and bitter misfortunes followed the Doctor up to his arrival at Ujiji in March, 1869. From the date of his arrival until the end of June, 1869, he remained at Ujiji, whence he dated those letters which, though the outside world still doubted his being alive, satisfied the minds of the Royal Geographical people and his intimate friends that he still existed, and that Musa's tale was the false though ingenious fabrication of a cowardly deserter. It was during this time that the thought occurred to him of sailing around Lake Tanganyika, but the Arabs and natives were so bent on fleecing him that, had he undertaken it, the remainder of his goods would not have enabled him to explore the central line of drainage, the initial point of which he found far south of Cazembe in about latitude 11 degrees, in the river called Chambezi. In the days when tired Captain Burton was resting in Ujiji, after his march from the coast near Zanzibar, the land to which Livingstone, on his departure from Ujiji, bent his steps, was unknown to the Arabs save by vague report. Messrs. Burton and Speke never heard of it, it seems. Speke, who was the geographer of Burton's expedition, heard of a place called Urua, which he placed on his map, according to the general direction indicated by the Arabs. But the most enterprising of the Arabs, in their search after ivory, only touched the frontiers of Rua, as the natives in Livingstone call it, for Rua is an immense country, with a length of 6 degrees of latitude, and as yet an undefined breadth from east to west. At the end of June, 1869, Livingstone quitted Ujiji and crossed over to Uguha, on the western shore, for his last and greatest series of explorations, the result of which was the further discovery of a lake of considerable magnitude connected with Meroe by the large river called the Lualaba, and which was a continuation of the chain of lakes he had previously discovered. From the port of Uguha he set off, in company with a body of traders, in an almost direct westerly course, for the country of Urua. 15 days' march brought them to Bambare, the first important ivory depot in Manyema, or, at least as the natives pronounce it, Manyuema. For nearly 6 months he was detained at Bambara from ulcers in the feet, which discharged bloody ichor as soon as he set them on the ground. When he recovered, he set off in a northerly direction, and after several days came to a broad lacustrine river, called the Lualaba, flowing northward and westward, and in some places southward, in a most confusing way. The river was from 1 to 3 miles broad. By exceeding pertinacity he contrived to follow its erratic course until he saw the Lualaba enter the narrow, long lake of Kamalandu, in about latitude 6 degrees 30 minutes. Retracing this to the south, he came to the point where he had seen the Luapula enter Lake Meroe. One feels quite enthusiastic when listening to Livingstone's descriptions of the beauties of Meroe scenery. Pent in on all sides by high mountains, clothed to the edges with the rich vegetation of the tropics, the Meroe discharges its superfluous waters through a deep rent in the bosom of the mountains. The impetuous and grand river roars through the chasm,